I ruined Thanksgiving by telling my family why I don't trust my brother. I'm 36 years old now, and for most of my adult life, my family has believed that my brother and I simply don't get along. That's the version that's easiest to digest. That we're just different people. That our personalities clash. That there's no real story there. I've never corrected them. My brother Eric is 2 years older than me. Growing up, he was the kind of kid adults loved immediately. He was loud in a charming way, confident without being arrogant, and somehow always knew exactly what to say to get out of trouble. Teachers described him as a leader. Coaches trusted him. Neighbors used him as an example when talking about their own kids. I was the opposite. I was quiet, observant, the kid who noticed things but didn't always speak up about them. I did well in school, followed rules, stayed out of trouble. I was easy to overlook, and for the most part, I learned to be okay with that. From the outside, Eric looked like a good older brother. He walked me home from school sometimes. He introduced me to his friends. He teased me, but never in a way that looked cruel to anyone else. But even as a kid, there was something about him that made me feel off balance. Like I was always reacting to him instead of standing on solid ground myself. He had a way of deciding things for me without asking. He'd answer questions directed at me. He'd volunteer me for things and then act surprised when I hesitated. If I objected, he'd laugh and tell me I was overthinking it. And if I pushed back too hard, he'd shift instantly into the wounded older brother role. I was just trying to help. I didn't think you'd mind. Why do you always assume the worst of me? I learned early that questioning his behavior made me look unreasonable. Our parents adored him. Not in a neglectful way. They loved me too. But Eric was easier. He didn't make things awkward. He didn't hold grudges. He didn't sulk. If there was tension, he smoothed it over with a joke or a smile. So when I felt uncomfortable around him, I assumed the problem was me. That pattern followed us into adulthood. The first time something concrete happened, something I couldn't explain away, I was 21, in my last year of college. I'd been working part-time since high school and had slowly built a small savings account. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I was proud of it. One afternoon, I logged into my bank account to check my balance and noticed a withdrawal I didn't recognize. It wasn't huge, a few $100s, but it stood out immediately because I was careful. I knew exactly how much money I had. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, a glitch. I called the bank, half expecting them to reassure me. They didn't. They told me the money had been withdrawn in person, with ID. At the time, Eric and I were both still using our parents' address. He knew where important documents were kept. He had access in a way no one else did. I remember feeling stupid for even considering the possibility. I didn't want to believe it. So when I asked him about it later that day, I kept my tone casual. I said something like, "Hey, this is probably nothing, but did you take some money out of my account by accident?" He didn't look confused. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even seem embarrassed. He said, "Oh yeah, I borrowed that. I was short on rent." I waited for the apology. It didn't come. He shrugged and said, "I figured you wouldn't mind. You're good with money." I told him I did mind, that he should have asked. He laughed, actually laughed, and told me to relax. Said I was being dramatic. Said he was family. Said he'd pay me back soon. And he did. A few weeks later, the money was back in my account. Everyone told me that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because the money wasn't the point. The point was how easily he crossed that line. And how quickly he made me feel ridiculous for noticing. After that, I started seeing smaller things more clearly. Things I'd ignored before. He'd tell people about my plans before I was ready to share them. He'd frame my decisions in ways that made me sound unsure or unstable. If I confronted him, he'd say he was just explaining me so people wouldn't misunderstand. When I moved cities after graduation, he told relatives I was struggling before I ever said a word about it. When I corrected him, he said I was being sensitive. I still tried to keep the peace. I still showed up for holidays. I still answered his calls. I just started being more careful about what I told him. I didn't realize how much that mattered until I was 27. That year, my long-term relationship ended badly. I was emotionally wrecked, financially strained, and not in a position to be picky. Eric offered to let me stay with him temporarily while I figured things out. I hesitated, but he was my brother, and everyone told me I was lucky to have him. Living with him felt fine at first, normal, even. We cooked together, watched TV, complained about work. He listened when I talked about the breakup, about how lost I felt, about my fears that I'd fallen behind in life. I told him things I hadn't told anyone else. I didn't realize I was handing him ammunition. A few months into that arrangement, I applied for a job that would have been a major step forward for me. Better pay, stability, something that felt like a reset after a rough year. I made it through multiple interview rounds. The final interview went well enough that I started imagining my life with that job. Then I didn't get it. The rejection itself hurt, but what bothered me more was how vague it was. I'd been confident. I'd received positive feedback the entire way through. A week later, a recruiter I trusted reached out privately. She wasn't supposed to say anything, and she made that clear. But she told me carefully that someone had raised concerns about my reliability. Not hard evidence. Not anything actionable. Just enough doubt to make the hiring team hesitate. She said it sounded personal. I remember sitting on my bed, phone in my hand, staring at the wall. Because the things she described, emotional instability, inconsistency, difficulty handling pressure, Those weren't things anyone at work would have known, but Eric would have. I never accused him outright. I didn't have proof. But when I mentioned the situation to him, his reaction wasn't surprise or outrage on my behalf. He sighed and said, "Maybe they were right. You've been going through a lot." That was the moment something finally snapped into place. From that point on, I stopped trusting him completely. I didn't cut him off. I didn't confront him. I just closed doors quietly. I stopped sharing details. I stopped venting. I stopped giving him anything he could reshape or reinterpret. To everyone else, it looked like distance. To me, it felt like survival. Years passed like that. We settled into a surface-level relationship. Polite, functional, shallow. Eric got married, had kids, became the version of himself everyone admired even more. A great father, a devoted husband, reliable, solid. Watching him with his kids is honestly disorienting. He's patient, gentle, engaged. If you only saw that side of him, you'd think I was cruel for holding on to old grudges. I questioned myself more than once. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I remembered things wrong. Maybe I was holding on to resentment that didn't matter anymore. Thanksgiving this year was supposed to be normal. My parents hosted, like always. Big meal, extended family, noise and chaos and forced cheer. Eric arrived with his wife and kids, arms full, smiling, immediately at ease. I told myself I could get through a few hours. Dinner went on longer than usual. Wine flowed freely. Stories were shared. At some point, my mom looked at Eric and me and sighed. She said she missed when we were closer. She said it casually, nostalgically, like it was a shame, but not a problem. Eric laughed and said, "I've tried. I don't know why she keeps me at arm's length." And suddenly, everyone was looking at me. That old pressure settled on my chest again. The expectation to smooth things over, to reassure everyone, to protect the version of Eric they were comfortable with. I felt tired. I felt tired in a way that wasn't about the day or the noise or even Eric. It was the kind of tired that comes from carrying something alone for too long. Everyone was still looking at me. My mom was smiling, waiting for me to say something light. My dad had that neutral expression he uses when he senses tension, but hopes it'll pass if no one feeds it. A couple of relatives were pretending not to stare while very obviously listening. Eric looked relaxed, amused, even. Like this was a harmless moment where I'd roll my eyes and say something self-deprecating, and we'd all move on. I'd done it before. I could feel the words forming automatically in my head. "We're just different people. It's nothing. We're fine." The usual script. Instead, I heard myself say, very calmly, "Because I don't trust you." The room went quiet in a way that felt physical, like the air had thickened. My mom blinked. "What do you mean you don't trust him?" Eric laughed. A short, surprised sound. "Okay, what's this about?" I hadn't planned to say more. That sentence had slipped out before I could stop it. But once it was out there, it felt dishonest to pretend it didn't have weight. I put my fork down. My hands were steady, which surprised me. "I mean I don't trust you," I said again. "I haven't for a long time." My mom immediately went into damage control mode. "Is this really the time for this? It's Thanksgiving." Eric shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I genuinely have no idea what you're talking about." That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to back down. I said, "You take things that aren't yours." He scoffed. "Like what?" "Money," I said. "Information. Decisions that aren't yours to make." My dad frowned. "What money?" Eric turned to him quickly. "This is ridiculous. She's bringing up ancient stuff." "It wasn't ancient when it happened," I said. "And it wasn't nothing." I told them about the withdrawal. How I'd checked my account. How the bank confirmed it was taken in person. How Eric admitted it without hesitation. How he laughed when I said it bothered me. My mom looked at Eric, confused. "You never told us about that." Eric's expression shifted, not to guilt, but irritation. "Because it wasn't a big deal. I paid her back." "That's not the point," I said. My voice was still even, but I could feel something shaking underneath it. "You didn't ask. And when I said it crossed a line, you acted like I was crazy for feeling that way." My aunt cleared her throat. Someone else shifted in their chair. Eric leaned back, arms crossed. "So this is about that one thing years ago." "It's about a pattern," I said. That was just the first time I couldn't explain it away. He rolled his eyes slightly. "Here we go." I talked about how he'd shared things about my life before I was ready. How he'd framed my choices as instability. How he'd volunteered me for things without asking and then acted offended when I said no. Eric shook his head through all of it, like I was making things up in real time. "You're twisting everything," he said. "I was trying to help you." "That's always your explanation," I said. "You never actually listen when I tell you it hurts." My dad finally spoke. "The job you mentioned earlier, what was that about?" I hesitated for half a second. That one still scared me, but I said it anyway. I told them about the interview process, about how far I'd gotten, about the recruiter's call, about the concerns that sounded eerily like things I'd only said in private, during the months I'd lived with Eric. "I don't have proof," I said. "I know that, but I know what it felt like. And I know your reaction when I told you." Eric laughed again, sharper this time. "So now I sabotaged your career?" "I think you talked," I said. "And I think you did it the same way you always do, calmly, reasonably, framed as concern, so no one would question you." His wife, who had been quiet until now, looked between us. "Eric." He turned to her, exasperated. She's rewriting history. She's always had this thing where she thinks everyone's out to get her. That sentence landed harder than anything else he'd said, because it was familiar. I looked at my parents. That's what he does. He makes it sound like I'm unstable for noticing patterns. My mom's eyes were wet. Why didn't you ever tell us this before? I laughed softly, without humor. I tried, and I was told to let it go, to keep the peace, to stop making things difficult. Eric slammed his hand lightly on the table. Because you are making things difficult. You always have. The kids were starting to notice the tension now. Someone suggested taking them into the other room. Plates of half-eaten food sat untouched. I said, the reason I don't trust you isn't one big betrayal. It's a lot of small ones that always end the same way. You're fine. I'm doubting myself. No one spoke for a long moment. Then my dad said quietly, I didn't know. Eric stood up. This is insane. I'm not sitting here being accused like this. My mom asked him to sit back down. He didn't. He said, if you want to believe this version of things, that's on you. But I'm done being attacked. He grabbed his jacket. His wife followed, confused and upset. The kids trailed after them. The door closed louder than it needed to. Thanksgiving was effectively over. No one touched dessert. People started making excuses to leave. My parents looked stunned, like they'd just seen the house crack in half. I helped clear plates in silence. Later that night, my mom cried in the kitchen. She said she didn't know what to do with what I'd told them, that she felt like she'd failed both of us. I told her I wasn't asking her to choose sides. I was just done pretending. Eric hasn't spoken to me since. My dad calls occasionally, carefully, like he's afraid of saying the wrong thing. My mom asks if I regret what I said. I don't. What I feel isn't relief. It's not satisfaction. It's clarity. I'm no longer carrying this alone. And even if the cost of that honesty was a ruined holiday and a fractured family dynamic, I don't think I could have kept swallowing it without breaking something in myself. You can ask me why I didn't say anything sooner. The truth is, I was waiting for the moment when staying silent hurt more than speaking. And that moment finally came, sitting at a Thanksgiving table, with everyone watching, when I realized that protecting my brother's image had been costing me my sense of reality for years.